Well, on a wholly depressing day, at least they scored, and even scored a couple times in the first two periods. So, progress. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose again 6-3 in Colorado to the Avalanche, a game that was closer than that for the vast majority of it. It was certainly the best game the Kraken have played, well, probably since their last win against the Montreal Canadiens, but there's still no way around the fact that they lose in regulation and now drop to 1-6-1 in their last 8. And it's a team that, especially by the end of the game, you could tell quite easily that it's getting to them. So with that all being the case, it really shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that there are once again more negatives coming out of this game for the Kraken than there are positives. But I feel like after how things have been going and how tonight went, maybe it's time to at least focus a little bit more on the positives and give some silver linings to this game for the Kraken against the Avalanche. Once again, it is a problem that the Kraken only got 20 shots on goal in this game, so somehow less than they got in Boston. But they did manage to score 3 times, and 2 of them came before the last couple minutes of the third period. So at the very least, they managed to break up the streak of getting shut out. And on top of that, they did get to the net a little bit more frequently, created a little bit more pressure around the net, had some presence there. So at the very least, the shots that they were getting towards the net were a little bit more dangerous, or at least had some more potential to create dangerous plays with either rebounds, tip-ins, screens, that kind of stuff. Though at the same time, don't get me wrong, there is still a long ways to go to get back to where they need to be as far as creating consistent net front presence, but there was still a lot more of it in this game than we've seen for the last few games now. It was mostly present in the first period and then a little bit at the end of the game, but progress is progress. Meanwhile, defensively for the Kraken, well, if we're trying to focus on positives and silver linings, there wasn't a lot there in this game. It was not a very good game defensively for the Kraken. From a coaching perspective, they did try to mix things up. So at the very least, the coaching staff, kind of got slapped in the face with it with 1 goal in the last 3 games. But they made some pretty big changes, scratched both Cartier and Bjorkstrand, neither of whom had really been having a ton of impact. And I don't think it was necessarily a specific comment on how those 2 players were playing. Maybe there's a little bit of that. And you'd have to think that the coaching staff probably had a one-on-one with those players, or maybe will in the next couple of days, as to why they were the ones that got scratched and what they need to be doing differently. Ultimately, though, I think it was more just a message to the team as a whole that things needed to change, and the coaching staff wasn't just going to keep sitting on its hands and sending the same group of guys out there, even if they mix up the lines a little bit here and there. They'd been trying to mix up the lines here and there for the last couple of games, and that clearly didn't do anything to change stuff, so they mix up the roster itself with both John Hayden and Ryan Winterton, who got called up, taking the spots of Cartier and Bjorkstrand. Again, though, just to be clear, these were definitely moves meant to send a message to the team to try to kick them in the butt a little bit to get things going and not just feel like they could be complacent in continuing to try the same stuff over and over again. There's no way around the fact that, especially Bjorkstrand, the lineup's worse without him in it, and I would say that Cartier, the lineup's better with Cartier in it rather than John Hayden, and that's kind of the switch there, where then you have Winterton instead of Bjorkstrand. And I think Winterton, he didn't have a great game, but it's his first game back up, and honestly, how he played in this game, I think, was more a victim of how that line played, and maybe even more so how that line was played against by the opposing coaching staff. So I guess it just depends on how you want to look at it. On the one hand, it's obviously not great that the team is in a place where they feel it's necessary to make non-ideal roster moves for specific games just to try to get the team kicked into gear. On the other hand, at least they're trying something and not just running their face into the same brick wall over and over again and hoping for a different result. Though, at the same time, I do have to say that while I do agree with the choice to make the moves that they did, at least for this one game anyway in the forward end, for all the reasons that I just went over, I don't necessarily think I can agree with, and I don't really see a positive way to spin the fact that they did the similar thing on the defensive end. Maybe not as drastically roster-wise, the only change was Fleury instead of Mahura, and that's ultimately the 6th defenseman that's taking the place of Vince Dunn being gone. The bigger issue is that they switched up the pairings. They put Montour up with Larson, which, I don't necessarily have a problem with. Those are your two best defensemen right now. But it did mean then that they split Mahura and Alexiak up and put Alexiak back with Borgen, who I suppose might not seem like that big of a deal. It is a pairing that we've seen quite a bit in the last couple of seasons, especially last year. They spent almost the entire year together. And I will say that they did have some bright spots, especially in the first half of last season. I thought they were generally pretty good, but it fairly clearly was a pairing that got worse rather than better as the season went along, and especially in the back half of the season, suddenly more and more mistakes started to show up, especially with both of them going below the goal line in the defensive end, then allowing passes to get out front, where if you've got two defensemen crashing one guy behind the net, then they're outnumbered out in front of the goal, which is not a good thing. It leads to good chances. Among other things, for whatever reason, they just don't always seem to bring the best out in each other, or at least didn't in the back half of last season. Anyway, agree or disagree, wouldn't you know it, but it was that pairing that had fairly easily the worst night of any of the three pairings, which, aside from, weirdly enough, Evans and Fleury actually played pretty well together the first full year in the NHL, and then Fleury, who's been up and down and has never had a solid spot in the NHL, somehow they managed to mesh the best of any of the three pairings and play the best and most offensively, certainly. Meanwhile, Alexiak in particular had, I would say, easily his worst game of the season, aside from maybe the very first game of the year against the Blues, which was a pretty tough night for him. But he's generally been very good for this team, partially because he's meshed well with Montour, who then you're putting not only with a new defensive partner that he hasn't played much with before, aside from I'm sure they play together in practice, but you're also putting him on his offside, which is going to throw things off even more. And, well, at least in the defensive end, it didn't work out. Anyway, all that to say, I think we should expect to see some different things being tried, at least in the bottom six. The top six stayed roughly the same, and at least the Beniers line had a decent night. Beniers at least had a decent night. Meanwhile, the bottom six, we'll get there. The right line in particular had a very tough night. It was maybe Wright's worst game of the season, and I think a lot of that had to do with Colorado, quite obviously and targetedly, which they're much easier able to do when they're the home team. You get the chance to respond to shift changes with the frozen puck from the other team. It was whenever they had the possible chance, they would put out McKinnon's line versus Wright's line, and yeah, McKinnon had a pretty good night. 5 assists, which some of those came on the power play, but either way, they were all over the right line all night long. And actually, one more thing on that topic real quick of the right line before we move on entirely, especially because I thought the broadcast, and fairly so, was tough on that line most of the night. I mean, not so much at the end of the night because they just weren't out on the ice very much by the end of the night because of how the start of the game went. I really don't put much of it on them. I see what they were trying to do by putting Wright and Winterton together, especially because they've had all of the time and experience together at the AHL level with the coaching staff that put them back together. So they're trying to get something there going, trying to get Wright going a little bit more offensively with a familiar face on his wing. And then Tolvanen is just kind of there because they needed a place to put Tolvanen in, especially with Bjorkstrand and Cartier out of the lineup. I mean, Tolvanen's a good shooter. Wright's usually good at setting things up, or at least getting net front to try to take advantage of hard shots like Tolvanen can produce. It just very clearly didn't work, and maybe it would have worked if they didn't have to face Nathan McKinnon all night long. But it did lead to a tough night for Wright, who, generally speaking, I think has had a decent season. He looks like a rookie. He definitely doesn't look like a superstar in the making or anything quite like that. Like he was touted to be coming into his draft year, and there's still time for him to develop. It's just a few games into his first season. He's only played the 9 games or 8 games last year, and it's only been 13, 14 games this season. And I think he's done a lot of the small things right. It's somewhat similar to Matty Beniers in that he's kind of focused more on the defensive end and responsibility there, which was always part of his game. One of the things the Kraken really liked about him, outside of just, he was one of the top picks and he dropped to you at 4, was that he is a 200-foot player. And coming into the NHL, especially when you're not the top line center and expected to be producing offensively, then you are expected to play a little bit better of a 200-foot game. And he has clearly been focused a little bit more on that and not doing as much of the offensive playmaking that we certainly saw him do at the AHL level and obviously all throughout juniors. Actually, I do think we saw him trying to do a little bit more of that in this game, and he kind of has been trying to do that as part of the desperation of this team to get something going over the last few games. We've seen a little bit more of the errant passes as he's doing no-look passes to places where if a player was there for the Kraken, would lead to breakout chances or great scoring opportunities. But the Kraken offensively have not been gelling well enough to be putting themselves in good scoring opportunity locations. So, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, Wright could maybe look where he's passing the puck in those instances, but on the other hand, it is that kind of sixth sense of the game and the idea of where to put the puck for the best scoring chances that has made Wright so good up until the NHL level. Again, I really only say all of that because it was pretty obviously a tough night for Shane Wright, and I know that there's a lot of expectations with him, the way he was drafted, the hype of him coming into that draft, as well as the hopes that have been placed on him to help get this scoring going for this team this season versus last season, with this being his first full year, and the fact that so far that scoring hasn't been happening. I get the sense that there's some frustration with how Wright has started off his season, and a game like this certainly isn't going to help that, so I just wanted to, again, add a little bit more perspective to where he's at, and just point out that because he hasn't gotten off scoring-wise to a great start doesn't mean that he hasn't been playing well in other areas, and that it doesn't mean he's not going to be a good player going forward. He is still less than 30 games into his NHL career. Okay, well, this was his 30th game in the NHL, so I suppose not less than 30, but either way, he's still very early on in his career. Those 30 games have come split up among 3 seasons, and even within those seasons, they've been all over the place. It's been a weird start to his career, to say the very least, and then it's a big ask on top of that to put him on a line with a team that's been struggling, with another guy who's played even fewer games at the NHL level, and someone who he hasn't played a ton with on the other wing in Tolvanen, and then they end up against one of the best forward lines in the NHL on the other side for pretty much the entire time that they're out on the ice. Which, as it happens, was the case when the Avalanche get on the board first. 2.5 minutes into the game, it's McKinnon out there with actually not his normal line, a couple of other forwards out there, but I think the Avalanche are happy to just throw McKinnon out there with 2 other warm bodies, and sometimes he'll just take over the game anyway. That was certainly the case in this one. The Kraken can't get out of their own end of the ice as Wright and Tolvanen have a misplays. They try to transition across the blue line into the neutral zone. That allows the Avalanche to get the puck back down deeper into the zone to McKinnon. And with some time and space, McKinnon's able to find Wagner on the far side, left mostly alone since the Kraken had 2 of their forwards up by the blue line trying to transition. The rest of the team is outnumbered. They leave a guy wide open on the back door. Wagner gets it. He fires off the shot on Grubauer and gets it past the outstretched arm and leg of Grubauer as he tries to dive to the far side, and it's 1-0 Avs. Now, I suppose the good news at this point is the Kraken did have 2 shots on goal already, so at the very least things are going better than they were in Boston, and they continue to go better for the Kraken when they get a power play a few minutes later, and on that power play, they really don't do much of anything with it until the last couple of seconds. They start to get set up, cycle the puck They cycle the puck one more time, and just as the power play comes to an end, the Avalanche player is let out of the box just as he crosses the blue line into the defensive end. The Kraken get it down to Matty Beniers below the face-off circle from a tight angle. He fires off a shot through the crease to the far side where Jaden Schwartz is just waiting in the blue paint, not touching the goaltender, so no interference here. And obviously the rule that you can't stand in the blue paint is long since passed. As long as you don't touch the goaltender, it's perfectly fine. Schwartz just makes a wall with his stick and blades. It bounces off of him into the net to give the Kraken the not power play goal, but the goal nonetheless, and also ties the game at 1. Their first goal in a first period, or first 2 periods of a game, since Montreal 4 games ago. And from there, the game would remain tied for another minute and 14 seconds until the right line's back out on the ice, which of course means McKinnon is soon to follow with 2 completely different forwards this time, not even his normal line or the 2 guys that he scored with out on the ice the other time. It's McKinnon who gets it down to some other forward for the Avalanche. He gets a rush chance on net, which of course causes all 5 Kraken skaters to converge on the net, and while Grubauer comes up with a pretty good save on that power move, the rest of the chaos in front of the net ends up crashing into Grubauer, knocking the puck free. It goes right out to Ivan, who's standing in open space, and with just a pile of bodies in front of him, all he has to be able to do is lift it over them to get it into an otherwise empty net. He's able to do that. So once again, it's a defensive breakdown from the right line, as well as actually this time, the pairing of Alexiak and Borgen. Following that quick response goal from the Avalanche to retake the lead, there is no more scoring in the first period, which for the Kraken is especially a good thing since the Avalanche get another power play in the later part of the period, which gets a few chances. Grubauer has to come up with a couple saves. The Kraken fortunately are able to kill it off, at least up until the Avalanche finish the kill by going to the box themselves. There's some 4-on-4 to finish the period. That doesn't go anywhere, and we go to the second period where the Kraken are going to get a power play within a couple seconds of the start of the period. And on that power play, just 23 seconds into the period, which is not that much longer after the Kraken player exited the box, so calling this a power play goal, I mean, it technically is a power play goal, just not a traditional, the Kraken got set up and made something happen. It's just a good forecheck by Chandler Stevenson, getting to a puck first in the corner, and then spinning, throwing a, I think, no-look pass out into the slot where this time, unlike when Wright tries it, there is a Kraken player right there in the right place at the right time. It's Jared McCann wide open in the slot without an Avalanche player anywhere within a country mile of him. Though it wouldn't have mattered as McCann just winds up for the one-timer. He fires it off and gets it right through the 5-hole to give McCann his 6th of the season, tie the game for the Kraken, and this time it is officially a power play goal. And regardless of whether or not this was a conventional power play goal, it is a power play goal, and it's, you know, with the other one being just a couple seconds after the power play coming to an end, a pretty good start to the game for the power play, even if they didn't necessarily create a lot of chances early on in their first attempt. They did score right as that attempt ended, and then score on this second power play that they get in the game. Unfortunately, that trend does not continue with the third power play that goes nowhere throughout the entire thing. I don't even think they get a shot attempt on the third power play. And then the Avalanche power play gets going, which is honestly not that much of a surprise, even with a Kraken penalty kill that for the most part has been a strength to this point in the season. This is just a very good and dangerous power play, clearly with the top-end talent that they have, and, well, once you know it, it's once again McKinnon with the puck on his stick. He fires a shot down into the slot where Lehkonen is open. He gets the one-time shot off. It gets through Grubauer, just barely, but through him nonetheless, giving the Avalanche the power play goal, and once again, the lead for the third time in the game. It's 3-2. And not even 2 minutes later, the Kraken decide that they wanted a second chance, redemption, I guess, as they send the Avalanche back to another power play. And although it takes the Avalanche longer, once again, they end up scoring on this one. Once again, it's McKinnon passing the puck, this time to Rantanen. Rantanen fires off the one-time shot. No chance for Grubauer. It's 4-2 Avalanche. But this time, the Kraken are going to challenge it for offside, and on replay, it's pretty clear that although it happened 40 plus seconds before the goal went in, so it really didn't have that much effect on the goal happening in the first place. Thankfully for the Kraken, though, that's not how the offside rule works. It doesn't care how long ago the team was offside as they entered the offensive zone, as long as the puck didn't recross the blue line or there was a stoppage for any reason. It's still offside and the goal can still get called back. So with the clear offside, they come back and say, no goal. Kraken dodge a huge bullet, and we can get back to trying to tie the game. Well, they are going to have to kill off 40 more seconds of power play for a second time, since all of that time will go back on the clock. Or it would have all gone back on the clock if we didn't spend 3 minutes not knowing what the heck's going on, as the officials are going from one bench to the other, back to the other bench. Then they're going to put the headphones back on. They're reviewing something, you don't really know what, and then they come back out, and upon further review, because I guess the first further review wasn't enough, they determine that the puck had entered the Kraken zone after a missed shot at the other end of the ice shorthanded, which unfortunately means that it's not actually offside. Because as it turns out, the one time you can be offside as you enter the offensive end is if the opposing team was the one that put the puck into their own end of the ice. And although it happens in a way that I've never seen before, and people that have watched a lot more hockey than I have never seen before, with the Kraken missing a shot at the other end of the ice, it still careens all the way along the boards and then into the Kraken end, where the Avalanche pick it up and then start 40 seconds of power play that eventually leads to the goal. But because the Kraken were the last one to touch it before it came along the boards and into their end, it's technically not offside. And a goal that was overturned gets re-overturned, and it is once again a goal. So the Kraken don't dodge a bullet. It turns out it curves right back around and hits them. I guess they're suddenly in the movie Wanted or something, I don't know. And once again here, I'll spend a little bit more time on it just because the broadcast spent quite a bit of time, or at least the Kraken broadcast spent quite a bit of time on that situation, and fairly so. It's a rare sequence of events that a lot of people just hadn't seen before, especially with it being a missed shot that led to nullifying the offside. Ultimately, they do get the call right, and I think for the health of the game, that is what you want. The question is how you get to the point where a successful challenge is then overturned. Because it's not like they determined that it was offside and then went to tell the coaches, and then the Colorado coach said, well, couldn't you look at this? They come out and announce that they have overturned the goal officially. There's no goal, play's going to resume. Then they go to the benches, talk to the coaches, and it's not an official challenge from the Avalanche side of things. They can't challenge a challenge or challenge a no goal call for that matter. I guess you can challenge a no goal call technically, but you can't challenge a challenge. But what they can do is just say, hey, this is what happened though. We've had all this time while you were reviewing it to look back and see that this is how the puck ended up in the zone. Couldn't you rewind and take a look at that if you didn't do it? And I guess they said, oh, yeah, I guess we didn't look at that. We'll go take another look, and the rest is history. Of course, then for the Kraken, the extra downside to their successful challenge turning out to be unsuccessful is that the unsuccessful part is the one that matters, and that means that the Avalanche get another power play after having just scored on back-to-back power plays. This time, in spite of the Avalanche very nearly scoring at the end of the third one, the Kraken do kill it off, and then really not much of anything of note happens until late into the third period, where the Kraken down 2 once again. Early goalie pull. It's just under 4 minutes left in the game when they get Grubauer out of the net. And, I mean, credit where it's due. They seem to have some sort of plan at 6-on-5 because they do look dangerous at 6-on-5. Kraken teams, especially, I don't know what it was with Hackstall, but one of the things that even when I liked the way he coached stuff in the defensive end, he never really seemed to have a good handle on when to pull a goaltender. Never mind that he would pull them too late when there's really not much of a chance with like a minute and a half left in the game. He would also pull them when you don't even have possession of the puck, stuff like that. The Kraken have been a lot better at not only pulling the goaltender early enough where you actually have a chance to make something happen, but also doing it when they have possession of the puck and it doesn't immediately come back down and right into the empty net as soon as the goaltender gets on the bench. All of which is actually relevant here is the Kraken wait until they get possession in the offensive end just under 4 minutes. Grubauer gets to the bench, 6 guy out on the ice, and then it does take them a little while in the offensive end to cycle the puck, get some shots on net, regain the puck with the extra guys. They're not great or haven't been over this last stretch of games. Very good at winning puck battles along the board, but for whatever reason when you have, well, I mean, it certainly helps to have one extra guy, but suddenly they can win one-on-one battles along the boards when there's the extra guy there for moral support, I guess. They're just suddenly much more capable along the boards, even if the extra guy isn't necessarily helping. Anyway, the point is the Kraken keep the offensive end, and after about a minute and a half, close to 2 minutes, a shot on net from Brandon Montour, who just fires it off, is tipped in front by Matty Beniers and finds the back of the net to give the Kraken the third goal of the game, and importantly, get them to within 1 with still 2.5 minutes left. So all they have to do is all of that again, and we can at least get to overtime and get a chance to win it in overtime, or at the very least 1 point in the standings, which, based on how hard it is for the Kraken to come by points currently, that would be certainly better than nothing. Unfortunately, this time they do get a little bit too eager to pull Grubauer. It's not long before he's on the bench. The Kraken don't really have possession in the offensive end. The puck is in the offensive end, but they don't have clear possession. The Avalanche end up with possession, and a puck that is thrown to the other end of the ice ends up going off an official, which allows the Avalanche to get to it first and shoot it into the empty net without any trouble. It's an unfortunate bounce. The official's obviously doing whatever he can to not have it hit him, but it's a bouncing puck. It's hard to predict where it's going to go. It hits him just enough to slow down for the Avalanche player to catch up to it first. The Kraken, with all the frustration that's boiled over in general from these last, I guess now 8 games, Gord not happy with the official for helping that happen unintentionally on the official's hand, but Gord has a moment that he probably would like to have back. He gets kicked out of the rest of the game, which honestly at this point is kind of meaningless. It's 5-3 with 2 minutes left, and that does send the Avalanche to another power play, which with 1 second left on the clock, they're able to score on. It's just a puck thrown to the back door. I think it was McKinnon once again that throws it to the back door. It's tipped in. McKinnon gets his 5th assist of the game, and the Avalanche win it 6-3. So once again with this game, a not very fun end to an even less fun road trip for the Kraken, with the only saving grace being the fun game in Montreal that kicked everything off. And they'll come back home desperately needing a win against a hot Vegas Golden Knights team before the schedule does ease up on them a little bit following that game against Vegas, though they've got the skills challenge coming up with a couple days off after that Vegas game. And yeah, it's already not probably going to be the most chipper of moods for the team going into that, what's supposed to be just a fun day for the fans. And if they go into that 0-7-1, or heck, even if they lose that game in overtime, you're going in one, or I guess not 0-7-1, 1-7-1, but even if they lose that game in overtime, you're going into it 1-6-2 in your last 9 games. Yeah, it's been a tough stretch for the Kraken, and by the end of the game, you could clearly tell that the frustration is starting to sink in. Beyond that, there's really not much more positivity or hopium, whatever you want to call it, that I can pull out of this game or this road trip. So in an effort to not make things worse tonight, or the day after, I suppose, by the time you're watching this, we'll close things out here with the Kraken 3 stars, focusing on 3 players that did have pretty good games. As always, brought to you by the patrons on Patreon. If you want to help support the channel a little bit more than you already are by watching the video to this point, which does help a lot, you can help by going over to Patreon as well through the link down below, and that gives you a chance to contribute to deciding the 3 stars after every game. And as far as Patreon's concerned, they agree with me. Every comment included Matty Beniers, so Matty Beniers is going to get the 1st star. I do think he was probably the best Kraken out on the ice in this game. He eventually gets rewarded with the tip-in goal at the very end of it, but even before that, he had a pretty good game for the Kraken. I wouldn't necessarily say one of his better ones of the season, but yeah, good game from Beniers, who I think has also been kind of flying under the radar and not scoring as much as necessarily his play is deserved to. So hopefully that picks up for him. In transition, he's been fantastic. I do think that, like I said, coming into the season, that this new system and focusing on fast transitions has improved and kind of highlighted some of his skill set. It just hasn't necessarily turned into points because, frankly, especially recently, the Kraken just haven't been able to get enough other players into the offensive zone to support him to help generate those points. Anyway, moving on to the other stars, one guy that has been getting into the offensive end and is paired with Beniers right now is Jared McCann. And once again, for I don't know how many times it's been now, it seems like for the Kraken, if they're going to get anything going offensively, it often happens through McCann in some way. He gets another goal in this game. The power play goal to start out the second period that tied things back up, and also generally was good. That first line had a pretty good night, at least, or I should say the very least, relative to how the rest of the team played. The first line was pretty good offensively. And then the 3rd star, I'll go with the only other guy that was mentioned over on Patreon, Brandon Tanev. I don't know, I suppose at the very least he is still fun to watch out there, flying around and laying big hits. The line that he was on in this game with Gord and Hayden was a hard-hitting line all game long. I mean, all 3 of those players are kind of known for that, but they didn't generate a ton offensively, and I guess played pretty well defensively. Just a hard checking line. At the very least, they made the Avalanche think a little bit more when they had the puck as to where one of those guys was going to be if they were going to get hit as soon as they touched the puck. So yeah, we'll throw Tanev in there. And yeah, with that, I suppose, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. If there's any more positive spins you can put on what's going on with the Kraken right now. It's pretty bleak, but again, I feel like this is a particular night where maybe a little bit more positivity would be more useful than negativity, just for the one game at the very least. Until next time, though, where hopefully we can get some positivity with a win against the Golden Knights. Be safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.